Okay, well, let's dive in. Thanks again for everyone joining us today. My name is James Burr. I'm with the Citizens Utility Board of Minnesota, and we're going to be doing a webinar on Xcel's electric rate increase. Xcel's at the PUC requesting to increase rates for electric service. If you want to go to the next slide. This is going to be the agenda for today, talking about Xcel's request. What are the basics of it? What are they asking for? How will it impact customers and what CUB will like to see? We'll dive into what's driving Xcel's request. Then we'll talk about the current status of Xcel's customers, how they are handling, the ever increasing cost of living, and then how this potential increase would impact them. Then we'll talk about CUB's focus in the rate case as well. And then finally, we'll have some time to talk about how you can submit a comment, get involved at the PUC, and we should have enough time for some Q&A. So we'll just run through the presentation. If you have any questions, please feel free to throw them in the chat. I'll monitor that as we go. If I have a good answer, I can throw it in the chat, but otherwise at the end, we'll run through those, and then folks can come off mute and share any questions. Okay, so before we just dive into the meat of the presentation, I want to give a quick background on CUB, if you want to go to the next slide. Oh, I apologize. I should introduce everybody that's going to be speaking today first. So again, my name is James Burr, Outreach and Communications Manager with CUB. I'll be moderating. And then we also have Annie Levinson-Falk, CUB's Executive Director, Brian Edstrom, our Senior Regulatory Advocate, and then Carmen Carruthers, our Outreach Director here at CUB. So if you want to go to the next slide. So there are three main tenets behind the Citizens Utility Board of Minnesota that really drive our work. Up front, we just believe that everyone's entitled to affordable energy and they deserve fair treatment by their utilities. And we're active at the Public Utilities Commission, working for a rapid, cost-effective transition to clean energy. I think it's really important for us to be involved there to make sure that it benefits consumers and the public and that no one gets left behind. And then just in general, we fight for transparency and accountability, really digging into those complicated dockets at the PUC to make sure that everyone in Minnesota gets a fair deal on their energy. Can we go to the next slide? We also, besides our advocacy work, we also have a really active and strong outreach team, which I'm a part of, along with Carmen. We're active all throughout the state, working with consumers to avoid or resolve utility disconnection. We take phone calls, Facebook messages, emails almost every single day, helping people navigate their energy issues, help them understand their rights and responsibilities. And we're doing a lot of work helping folks understand how they can plan for a clean home energy future. So we were founded in 2016, and since then we've assisted over 25,000 people across the state from almost every corner of the state. So that's about CUB. I want to thank everyone again for being here. I see some faces and names I recognize and some I don't. But with that, I think I'm going to throw it over to Andy to run us through the top line of Xcel's request.
Thank you, James. As James said, I'm Annie Levinson-Falk. I'm CUB's Executive Director. It's a little disconcerting to see a half dozen of me in the participant list, so I don't know what Zoom is up to today, but it's good to see you all, whatever your real names are. I am also serving as an expert witness in Xcel's rate case, and I've submitted testimony, particularly on the angle of affordability and how the rate hike request will affect Xcel's customers, and also on a couple of specific recommendations that we will talk to in more depth. But first, to start at a high level of what Xcel has asked for. So when a utility wants to raise its base rates, it has to file what's called a rate case at the Public Utilities Commission, and the PUC has to review that. It's open to input from parties like CUB and any individuals like yourselves or anybody who wants to weigh in, and then the PUC has to make a final determination that sets rates. But the utility makes kind of the starting offer. So what Xcel has asked for, which has been refined over a couple of filings here now, but they're asking for more than $500 million in new revenue for Minnesota ratepayers on the electric side. It's a 10% increase in overall revenue. And for their average residential customer, that translates to more than $120 increase per year of that Xcel is requesting. And the reasoning that Xcel has listed for this, they've kind of listed a few different reasons. One is modernization of the transmission and distribution system. So the wires in the wire systems are old. They need to be modernized. We need more transmission. The same is true of the generation side. So the generation fleet is overall pretty old. The fossil fuel plants are now being replaced with renewables that are more cost effective and they don't have a fuel cost, but there is a cost to building them. And more of that ends up in base rates because fuels are charged separately. So that is part of the driving force for the rate increase as well. Xcel has talked about preparing for more electrification in the future, particularly electrification of transportation. So that is in their thinking, but they have also talked about filing the rate case in response to lower sales. Most of a utility's costs are they're fixed, their infrastructure. So if you have X number of dollars of infrastructure costs, you divide that up by the number of kilowatt hours of electricity that's sold and determine the rate. If they're selling less power, then that kilowatt hour rate needs to go up. So Xcel has also cited lower sales as a reason for bringing the rate case. What you don't usually hear them talk about is their request for return on equity. So return on equity, ROE, Brian's going to talk about this in a lot more detail, but it's basically a key determinant of the corporate profits and shareholder returns. And the PUC authorizes a return on equity and bakes that into utility rates. And Xcel is requesting to increase their return on equity, and that's probably the single largest factor in their rate increase. The context that this is coming in for Minnesota ratepayers, unfortunately, past due balances are considerably higher than they were, but prior to COVID, really. The arrearages rose sharply over COVID, and they have been really stubbornly high. They're not coming back down to pre-pandemic levels. They're actually about that. An Xcel customer who is past due, the average past due amount is now about $500. That's about double what it was prior to the pandemic. Shutoffs too are now at record highs. Xcel disconnected 52,000 households last year across their electric and gas systems. That was a record, and unfortunately, as of October of this year, they exceeded that for this year already. So this year's total is going to be even higher. That's partly due to the, past due balances being up and customers being behind. It's also partly due to the fact that Xcel is now shutting people off remotely, and so it is able to shut off more customers. They don't have to do in-person site visits in most cases. More broadly, this is all coming in the context of so a lot of stuff that's going on at the federal government that is not exactly helping. I probably don't have to tell this audience this, but HR 1 that passed last summer, it cut tax credits for new generation. It cut tax credits for measures people can take to improve the efficiency of their homes and reduce their bills. There are a number of other portions of that legislation that are going to be raising costs more than they otherwise would go up. Grant funding and stuff that was under contract for a number of projects and efforts here in Minnesota. A lot of that has been canceled and or is in some sort of a litigation right now and is just uncertain. And there's uncertainty as to really core programs like energy assistance, which was delayed due to the federal shutdown this year. Thankfully, it's up, but there are threats to that and questions whether that will continue in future years. As well as, non-energy programs that people rely on, like SNAP and just, healthcare costs going up and what is the impacts to Medicaid. And all of that has an impact on how people are able to afford their energy costs as a part of their family budget. So with that said, what we are asking for in this rate case, CUB is focused on a few main topics. First of all, that rates remain as low as possible. So it's probably true that some level of rate increase is going to be justified. But we want to make sure that any rate increase is fully vetted and it's not going up any more than needs to. Top on our list there is making sure that Xcel's ROE is at a reasonable level. And in our evaluation, it actually has to go down instead of up. And then we've also looked at some fees that are impacting those customers who are least able to afford them. So reconnection fees and late fees, we're asking for those to be eliminated. And we'll talk in more detail about all of this. So I'm going to pass it over to Brian to talk about return on equity.
All right. Hello, all. Nice to see you, and thanks again for joining. My name again is Brian Edstrom. I'm an attorney at CUB and a senior regulatory advocate here. So I'm one of the folks that kind of leads our advocacy work at the Public Utilities Commission. And as Annie mentioned earlier, there can be reasonable justification for rate increases, and they are inevitable periodically to ensure that this essential service that we all rely on is safe and reliable and available to us. So part of what Xcel is doing here will be they have to meet a burden of proof to show that the costs that they plan to incur to upgrade their infrastructure and to help ensure the safety of their equipment and service and pursue beneficial electrification, that those costs are reasonable and that it is appropriate for customers to share in paying for those costs. So that's a big part of a rate case. But there are opportunities where we believe it's really important to advocate for consumers to try to protect the utility from raising rates more than is really necessary to do those things. So next slide, please. And as Annie said, really a big area that we have focused on in our advocacy work in rate cases is return on equity. And I'll drill into that a little bit more. But in a nutshell, that is a dollar amount that's kind of baked into rates where the utility will ask for permission to apply a percentage of a return on equity, the equity investments they make in capital projects that ratepayers will pay, and that then supports the utility's profits that is distributed to shareholders. And that is a huge part of rate cases. It's one of the most hotly contested issues in a rate case, and it's one of the biggest just dollar amount issues that drives a rate increase. And it's something that I think doesn't really we don't hear about it very often in the news or in sort of general talking points about rate cases like this. It's really something that is debated by nerds like us who get involved in the details. But it's really important, and it's something that we've been learning a lot about. And we've hired an expert who has been working in the utility industry and currently works for the Citizens Utility Board of Wisconsin. And he's been doing this work for 40 plus years and is a finance expert that really understands return on equity and provides testimony on our behalf that advocates for limiting Xcel's ability to increase its ROE in a way that really dramatically increases rates. So as it says on this slide here, the ROE increase that Xcel is requesting would alone raise the revenue requirement or raise the collective rate that they pass through to Minnesotans by $100 million per year. That's just, what ratepayers would pay to increase the utility's ability to generate profits. Next slide, please. And the law around this is complicated, and it's based on, gosh, 100 years almost of precedent. And when we write legal briefs, we dig into the details of that case law. But to try to summarize it at kind of a high level, regulated utilities are granted a monopoly. Essentially, they have exclusive rights to serve their service territory in exchange for being regulated. So that means if you're an Xcel service territory, obviously you can't easily just choose a different electric provider if you're unhappy with what you're paying. You would either have to move to a different service territory or go off the grid and produce your own electricity, which obviously is not an available option for most people. And part of that that legal framework that establishes that monopoly service is utilities are allowed to collect their costs, their reasonable costs from ratepayers, and they are allowed to earn a reasonable return. They have the right to earn a reasonable return. And what is reasonable is the sticking point. And Xcel and all regulated utilities are consistently arguing that a reasonable return is higher than what they're currently authorized to make, and advocates like us are continuously pushing back on that. And the Public Utilities Commission has the difficult task of striking that balance. And the law requires the U.S. Supreme Court has weighed in on this in some precedential cases that are brought up in every single rate case. And they talk about really the Public Utilities Commission and utility regulators have a responsibility to balance utilities' right to earn a reasonable return against ratepayers' ability to pay for that return. And that's obviously, there are a lot of factors that go into that. Next slide, please. So, and the way the law kind of clarifies what a reasonable return is there's a case called the Hope decision that is again cited in every rate case that essentially says that a reasonable return is one that allows a utility to attract investment capital, to maintain its financial integrity and creditworthiness, and compete with companies of similar risk. So, compete with other regulated utility companies. And so a lot of a rate case, the evidence that's introduced around ROE is around these factors, trying to show that the utility is trying to show that they need a higher ROE to meet those conditions. Our advocacy, on the other hand, is focused on kind of the other side of that equation, balancing the shareholders and ratepayers' interest by introducing evidence of how increasing rates to support an ROE negatively impacts ratepayers who might already be struggling to pay rates and experience financial hardship if rates increase dramatically to support a higher ROE. Next slide, please. And right now is an interesting time. So Xcel is proposing to increase their ROE very significantly, but they're doing quite well. Their parent company, Xcel Energy Inc., has had their annual profits on kind of steadily increasing over the last several years. Just in October this year, their stock price hit an all-time record high. And then the earnings per share from the Minnesota utility specifically, which is a subsidiary of that bigger holding company, has also been doing very well. Their earnings per share attributed to the Minnesota utility has also been increasing over the last few years. So it's kind of a bold and, in our view, aggressive request for them to say, despite them being on this trajectory, they still need more profits from Minnesotans. Next slide, please. And then, the bottom line in that regard is we've all been hearing about this affordability crisis and hardship that continues to affect people across the country and Minnesotans. And it's really not an appropriate time for us as consumers to pay more to allow Xcel to continue to increase that trajectory and have their profit margin go up even further. So we are advocating for Xcel's authorized ROE to go down, and we think that will help protect ratepayers while also allowing Xcel to continue to earn a reasonable return and provide safe and reliable service. And with that, I'll pass it along. Thanks.
Hi there, thank you. I'm Carmen Crothers, CUB's Outreach Director, and I'm going to build on some of the things that Brian was talking about in terms of providing some insight into what Minnesota Xcel consumers are actually experiencing and kind of put that people face on this discussion. So while Xcel is having record profits, their customers are struggling to keep up with bills, which is evidenced by the fact that the past due balance has reached $90 million. So there's that much unpaid bills from Xcel customers. So clearly people are not able to keep up with their bills. Also in 2024, 52,000 customers were disconnected, as Annie had previously mentioned. The current amount is even higher than that, so on track to exceed the 2024 disconnections. And almost a quarter of the households, according to the US Census Bureau in 2024, had to make important decisions about being able to keep up with their energy bills. So they either reduced their comfort in their home and used less energy, or had to go without other basic necessities in order to pay those bills. So really difficult decisions people are making across the state to keep up with their bills. And we encourage you, like we have these kind of call outs of comments that people have submitted related to the rate case that give some personal insight into what folks are dealing with who have chosen to comment on the rate case. So this common challenge people have about whether to heat their home and keep the electricity going compared to trying to afford some of their medical expenses, which we know are also going up. If we can go to the next slide, please. Okay, and again, just kind of the context of what people are dealing with as we're facing this additional rate increase. We all know that the basic costs of living have been going up significantly over the last several years. And we recognize that it is not Xcel's role to address all of the economic woes in our country that folks are dealing with. However, we need to have that in context in terms of what is a reasonable rate increase to keep the system going and be reliable and serve people's needs, but not have undue profits that are going to affect the vast number of customers negatively as they're struggling with other bill increases. We also want to recognize that COVID-19 was a very disruptive event for many people economically. And so it is a contributing factor. People have not been able to catch up and kind of recover in the way that would be desired. But it's not just COVID-19. It's the ongoing issues related to the increased cost of living that we're all dealing with. And it's just that it's increasing in terms of the number of households that are coming up short, and those that are coming up short are falling further and further behind. I think this quote on the right side here is an interesting one too, where we have someone who is in the beginning of their career doing what they wanted, were told they need to do to set up a good lifestyle, and still struggling just to come up with paying basic bills. And go to the next slide, please. So here's a graph that talks about the trend in shutoffs. So we can see before the pandemic, things were fairly constant, typical sort of things. During the pandemic, there was a moratorium on utility disconnection, so obviously the numbers went way down. But you can see it's just skyrocketed since that time, well exceeding what we used to see pre-pandemic levels. And just again, quotes on the side, people experiencing being behind $1,000 or more. And it's very difficult to catch up when you get this far behind. I'll go to the next slide, please. Okay, other issues that are impacting people, as Annie had alluded to, we recently had a delay in energy assistance, a really important program that helps people pay for their energy bills between October and May. That people had to experience that delay, figure out what to do in between, but their bills continue to go on. Thankfully, energy assistance funds are available now and being distributed as we speak. So we're really happy that people are going to see some relief in that area. But there's other issues happening at the federal level that are also going to contribute directly and indirectly to our energy costs going forward. The home energy tax credits are expiring at the end of this year. This is a program that would encourage people to make their homes more energy efficient and actually reduce bills over time by using less energy. And additional impacts from the omnibus bill are also going to raise our electricity prices. So these are big picture things happening that are important to keep in context with this rate case. There are also things happening across the country and in the Midwest specifically, where a federal order is forcing non-cost effective power plants to continue operating, and we are all going to bear the costs of continuing to have those run. and that's contributing to the costs across the system. I'm going to go on to the next slide, please. Okay, so we wanted to spend a little bit of time touching on all the things we do, both from a policy standpoint and an outreach to help protect customers. So our policy and advocacy teams are closely monitoring our utilities. We're recommending changes in policy to address things to serve customers, to protect them. And there's a really nice connection between the outreach work that is done by CUB and the policy team, and that we're actually talking to consumers on a regular basis and hearing stories like we have presented in this PowerPoint presentation, that we're constantly talking to people who need help either avoiding a shutoff or getting their power turned back on. These are real people trying to do their best to get by day, and we're hearing these stories on a regular basis. So that in context of thinking that their rates are going to go even higher is very concerning. We give a lot of talks and presentations across the state on various topics, and we hear from people about the types of questions they have, how programs work, what is the future of energy, and those sorts of discussions also help influence the policy decisions we're discussing in terms of what the grid should look like in the future, how can customers best be served, what programs need to exist. And then finally, we give individual energy bill consultations where we literally sit down with the household, look at their bills, learn about how the household operates, provide specific suggestions of things they can do to try to manage their bills and meet their energy goals. And all of these interactions are very impactful in terms of really understanding what's happening on the ground to Minnesota consumers of all backgrounds and income levels. And I think this is why we feel like it's so important to stand strong when we're looking at these rate cases about what is reasonable and what is not reasonable. We can go to the next slide. So we wanted to give you a sampling of some additional comments that people have submitted regarding this rate case. So I think these are really good examples as you read through them of how people are really trying to juggle their bills, right? It's not that people feel like they don't have to pay bills. It's that they struggle just to figure out how do we prioritize what needs to be paid when, just to keep kind of our basic things going. This middle comment is someone who in the summertime is just struggling to be able to keep her home comfortable. At 75 degrees is not an unreasonable temperature in the summer. You have to run air conditioning to do that, but it's costing her $200 a month just to stay comfortable and address her health concerns. And then the opposite effect that we have in the winter, today being a nice cold Minnesota day, can you imagine keeping your thermostat at 57 degrees to save money? That is clearly not a comfortable temperature and probably not a healthy temperature to be keeping your home at. If we go to the next slide, please. Some examples. I think when you look at these examples, it's all really about trying to manage a budget. And it's really hard to manage a budget appropriately when costs continue to rise and if incomes are not rising in line with that. So I think these are really good examples of the impact that an energy bill has in someone's overall budget. So this is, again, one of our motivations for trying to keep rates as low and reasonable as possible. If we go on to the next slide. So, in conclusion, we just want to make sure people are aware of the context within the time we are for this rate case. Xcel customers are already struggling, and the PUC should really be focused on trying to keep the bills as reasonable as possible so that people have an opportunity to be able to pay their bills not fall further behind and hopefully have an opportunity to catch up. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Annie.
Thank you. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about our specific recommendations in this rate case to try to bring the total rate increase down. So Brian talked about lowering the ROE. That's the biggest ticket item in the rate case and probably in most rate cases. As Brian said, Xcel wants to increase its return on equity by a substantial margin at a cost of an additional $100 million per year from Minnesota ratepayers. Our expert witness analyzed Xcel's actual cost. This is their return on equity. He analyzed their actual cost of equity and what the margin is that would be the return for their shareholders, and found that they're already earning substantially above their costs, and unreasonably so, particularly looking at the state of affordability of their customers. And he's strongly recommending that Xcel's return on equity needs to go down, probably by a substantial margin. You can't take that big of a jump all at once, or you would be unfairly harming the shareholders. You know, it's the PUC's job to make that balance and make sure that what they're doing is fair to everyone involved. So our recommendation is to make an incremental step down in the return on equity, but seeing that as part of a longer term project of bringing the ROE back to something that is more a reasonable balance between shareholders and ratepayers. We're recommending Xcel's ROE go down from 9.25% to 9%. Rather than an increase of $100 million, that would result in a savings of $24 million per year. We're also looking at, as I mentioned, reconnection fees and late fees. So these are two distinct fees that are applied to those people who can actually least afford it. A reconnection fee is once you have had a shutoff for unpaid bills. When the utility turns your power back on, you're charged a fee for that. Right now it's $13.50 if they can do it remotely, $50 if they have to send somebody to your home to do it if you don't have their new advanced meters. In total, the total cost of this is less than $500,000 a year for Xcel's residential, all of their residential customers. If you were to have that covered by all customers, it would be 3 cents a month. So it's an immaterial cost if you were to have all customers cover it, but it is a significant cost for those who are the most cost burdened. So our recommendation is to have that covered by all ratepayers and to relieve people who are dealing with the shutoff from that additional fee. Late fees are a much more substantial fee that's applied to bills. So if you're past due on your bill, Xcel charges you 1.5% per month. That's equivalent to 18% a year. When I was doing my testimony, I looked up my credit card rate, and it's less than that on one of my credit cards. So that was striking to me. Credit card companies make money off of charging interest, and monopoly utility is not supposed to do that. There's no proof that late fees actually accomplish the stated purpose, which is to be an incentive for people to pay their bills on time. So instead, what it is, it's punitive. It far exceeds Xcel's actual cost of interest itself. And it can add up to an enormous burden. It compounds each month. We've seen customers who have $3,000 or more have accumulated late fees alone as part of their past due balance. And that contributes to people being in such a hole that they cannot get out. So as I said, our conclusion from that is it's punitive, it's not accomplishing its stated purpose, and it's harming the people who are the most energy burdened. And we recommend that late fees be eliminated. Xcel has said it's open to eliminating fees for people who have qualified as low income. Typically, that means having received energy assistance. And with late fees, at the PUC's direction, it proposed a new program, which it calls RAMP, to redistribute those fees back to a subset of past due customers. That's not, I mean, the program itself is, there are some good aspects about it, particularly it's designed to reach folks who are struggling with affordability, but maybe don't qualify for other income qualified programs. But in our view, it doesn't make sense to charge customers who can't pay their bills and then turn around and give a portion of that charge back to some of those customers. It would be more fair to simply waive the fee in the first place. It's not accomplishing the purpose that it's stated to accomplish. So, as I said, CUB is proposing to eliminate reconnection fees. It would be probably an unnoticeable cost increase for all residential customers to do that. And then to eliminate late fees as well. We do have an alternative where if the commission doesn't agree with us to entirely eliminate late fees, at least to set them at Xcel's actual cost of interest, which is less than a third of what customers are being charged right now. That's just a summary of our recommendations. I'm going to pass it back to you, James.
Thank you, and thank you to everybody for sharing how this has gone. I obviously am deep in on it because I work here, but I think we did a good job of explaining everything. So I just wanted to talk about what the process looks like for getting involved in a rate case on a public personal level. So there is a public comment period currently open through December 30th. And you can submit a comment to the PUC by emailing them. They have a comment form on their website. We also have a form that you'll see in a second. So if you do have concerns about this proposed rate increase, you can make your voice heard at the PUC. Um, Other key dates coming up, intervening parties like CUB and other groups that are getting involved in the rate case, they're going to file their final legal briefs at the end of February in 2026. An administrative law judge is going to issue its findings to the PUC, so recommendations and examining the record at the end of April next year. And then the PUC has a deadline for a final determination on the rate case end of July in 2026. We were expecting sometime in June or July for that final decision. We'll go to the next slide. So yeah, like I said, you are able to submit a comment. There's this email here, consumer.puc@state.mn.us. It's a mouthful. But you can submit a comment anytime before December 30th at 4:30 p.m. That's when the comment period closes. We have some tips for an effective comment here on the right. I think it's really important that it's not just like how to make a comment effective is to make sure that it's actually something that's going to impact you, being very clear about why you're concerned and how it's going to impact your life specifically. These comments really do help regulators understand what utilities are doing and how it will impact customers, and they need to hear from people in the public. So be yourself and feel free to refer to any of the materials that we have on our website. And there's this QR code here. We actually have a form set up where you can go there, type in your comment, and then it'll get sent straight to the PUC. So multiple different ways to get in touch with them and multiple different ways to make your voice heard. If you want to go to the next slide. Are we on the next slide? There we go. Yeah, so this is just going to be a bunch of different articles. We've done a lot of communications the past few months on Xcel's proposal to increase electric rates. So we have this page on our website, that far left QR code, Xcel Electric Rate Hike Hub. That's going to house everything that we've written about this case since the beginning, as well as some really key takeaways that you learned here, but you can dive in more to some of the elements of it. In particular, this one article, What Customers Are Saying, highlights a lot of the public comments that have already been received at the PUC. And CUB's Ask, that dives into what we're seeking in the rate case, what we hope the final outcome is going to be. But we'll follow up in an email with a recording of this presentation and a couple good links to, expand your knowledge on this issue. And then also just want to make a final pitch before we wrap up here, but please feel free to subscribe to CUB's newsletter. We send one out about every other week with key updates on what's happening on the utility level and energy environment here in Minnesota. And then if you support the work that CUB does, please feel free to support us with a donation on the right here. And with that, I think that is the bulk of our presentation here. I am happy to answer any questions with the rest of the team.